preparedness for me is pretty much a 3-pillar system. You want to stockpile material goods against potential chaos, have the training to use those material goods, and then have the appropriate heart set and mindset and skill set to be able to employ those material goods.
And if you like the interview that you're about to listen to, part 2 of this is on the Adapt 2030 Patreon Grand Solar Minimum Preparedness Group. We were interrupted in the call, and you can see what we talked about when our call was interrupted. Subject matter might help you moving forward as all these different cycles are converging. Good afternoon, everybody. Today I have with me Bear from Bear Independent. We're talking about preparedness. This grand solar minimum intensifying, the signs are all around us. We saw the cloud tops of that typhoon over the Philippines registering the coldest temperatures ever recorded on our planet for cloud top. Measurements at 167 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. The cloud tops were so high that it actually went off of NASA's cloud scale at above 16 kilometers, meaning that the cloud heights of that storm penetrated through the stratosphere and it actually pegged off the charts, so they don't really have a measurement for the cloud top heights, but it was the coldest ever recorded on our planet. At the same time, off of Africa, there's 5 different typhoons, but what's most interesting, cyclones, in that part of the world, you can really see that things are starting to change in the weather systems, whatnot, across the planet. Grand solar minimums intensifying, crop losses are here, so it's time to talk about preparedness as well as solutions. And if you're looking for more great information here with Bear, you can take a look. Instagram, Bear Independent, Patreon as well, where he's putting up more of his really quality content over on Patreon, as well as the YouTube channel, Bear Independent. So I thought it'd be good for us to come together today to try to share some individual solutions, talk about the problem, define it a little bit, but taking a look at a completely different mind frame of getting prepared, staying prepared, mentally prepared, spiritually prepared, physically prepared. So it's not going to be about you sitting in your basement for 30 years with eating tins of food by yourself, hoping that the world will stay alive long enough so you can get above ground again in 30 years and be like, hey, I'm back. It's not going to work like that. You'll go insane before anything like that. So Bear, thanks for joining me. I know we've been trying to put this interview together, and floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David. I'm really excited to be here. I am a big fan of Adapt 2030 and have been for a good long time. And I owe that to a viewer that we share, Ulf Hidnar Tribesman. So thank you, Tribesman. A couple years ago, he put me on to you, and I kind of felt a disturbance in the force, but I didn't know what I was feeling. And I was looking at the weather patterns and experiencing these variations in the norm, and I had no way to even put to words what I was experiencing. And he pointed me towards you, and a giant light bulb went off. And so thank you for that. You have become my go-to subject matter expert on the Grand Solar Minimum, so I really appreciate you and what you do. So
it's taken me a few years to try to define exactly what it was. When I first started off, back in 2014, at the end there, when I was a coffee buyer in Myanmar, I was trying to define the problem as well, too. I was just trying to put it into words, what I was experiencing with the cold weather crop damage in Myanmar, otherwise known as Burma. So for me, I used to be a very big global warming believer until I saw on the ground firsthand that things were changing. And, I believe that things are changing too quickly, that us as a species, we're not going to be able to cope with the changes in our climate that are happening so rapidly. I mean, this tiddly-taddly around the issue with the IPCC, oh, it might warm, oh, this, they're talking century-level change. I am more of the volition that we are in years of change coming up that's going to disrupt our society and our economy. The change is going to be so vast and so great, so quick that we're just not going to be able to handle it unless you get prepared. These are some of the things I wanted to talk about and pick your brain today too was, on your end, you're all about preparedness. I'm over here trying to define the problem and, getting preparedness, in motion myself. So I'm always trying to learn from people better than myself on issues where I'm trying to learn about it, and defining the problem there's an enormous amount of information out there now. It looks like this grand solar minimum is definitely increasing in intensity. We have the magnetic pole reversal going on, which we never had in a previous or a prior grand solar minimum. And the reason I wanted to talk about 2014-15 when I started this, all of these timelines that John Casey and Dr. Abuzamatov and a few others had put together out there for timelines on how fast this was going to manifest, it seems that it's far, far faster than anybody has anticipated. So the uptick in the amount of time we have left is far less than we thought we had left.
It definitely feels like things are accelerating. And that's one of the common things that I hear with the people that I talk with, that we consult with, and just the lay person on the street. Everything feels like it's moving faster than it should be. And that tends to give people a lot of anxiety. Even if they are into preparedness, and preparedness for me is pretty much a 3-pillar system. You want to stockpile material goods against potential chaos, have the training to use those material goods, and then have the appropriate heart set and mindset and skill set to be able to employ those material goods. The number one of which for me, even though I have a Glock sign hanging behind me and a Glock on my hip, is not firearms. That's part of it, but it's food. I have one pistol and one sign, and I'm within arm's reach of thousands of pounds of food at my office. And I think that's what a lot of people get wrong with preparedness. There's a focus on the zombie apocalypse and, civil unrest in the streets and all of this stuff that's going on. And while, maybe you should be worried about that, you're going to need to eat. And so we look heavily at food storage, and specifically food storage as a cushion that will buy us time to increase our prowess in agriculture, to spin up our agriculture and learn how to adapt to grow food. It has been so frustrating for me. I'm a homesteader, newly on a piece of land 18 months ago or so, and none of the historical data is applicable. It's driving me crazy. We've had a cooler season and the most rain ever. Well, it's really hard to grow when you're not getting those heat units and everything's swamped, as I'm sure you're aware. And so while we absolutely are proponents of stockpiling food, we stockpile food from the vantage point of using that as a cushion, that as the supply chain logistics of the system degrade, that buys us time to spin up our own decentralized system to produce our own food more locally, regionally, rather than nationally or globally. And that's one of the reasons why I follow you, is because I like to hear what other people have to say from around the globe about what they are experiencing, because it helps me correlate what I'm experiencing. So food storage for sure and food production for sure are two of the biggest things for me when it comes to preparedness. And I know you talk quite a bit about that as well.
Yeah, I do, with the seeds especially. You're going to have to start to grow your own food, but it's not a magic science where you throw a seed in the ground and 2 minutes later, Jack and the Beanstalk comes up and you have a bountiful food supply. It's just not like that. And, the early indicators I'm looking for also in terms of a lockup or reduction in the amount of available foods that you can get is out here on the rest of the planet where the economy is not doing so well, and especially being in Asia. It seems like the center point of things starting to fall apart economically. So in my channel, what I'm starting to do now is go more into the economy that's twisting inside of everything. Because when we look at these historical, correlations to past grand solar minimums, there's always an economic element to it as well. So if you also moving forward in 2 or 3, 4 years from now, our supply chains are not going to be functioning as efficiently as they are now. There's going to be some lockups in the available credit, and credit is what gets containers and ships moving across different oceans and bringing you things. So, for myself too, I'm looking much more in the local solutions for things. I have a lot of people ask me, well, what are the supermarkets like over in Taiwan? What are the supermarkets like in Asia? Well, I only go for the things I really can't get at a fresh market or a farmer's market when I go to the supermarket. I don't use that as my main source of food. I do for cheese, because cheese is very difficult to get in Asia. So if you're going to try to get some nice block cheese or something on a wheel, you're going to have to go into a supermarket to get it. But I'm looking at fresh vegetables, duck eggs, quail eggs, goose eggs, super giant goose eggs, enough for 5 people. You're going to have to go to a farmer's market or fresh market. So that's more where I'm looking at too, because they already know the conditions on the ground. It has been raining nonstop here for 3 straight days. When I say nonstop, I mean incredible rains for 3 straight days. I can't even believe it's rained that much, that there's that much water in the atmosphere that can still come out after 3 days. I don't even know how the plants are going to do out back. I think all the soil is going to get bounced out of the pots there, because it's been raining so much, so heavily for days now. And all the old timers here are talking about how cold it's gotten so quickly, and the amount of rain that's come down. That's, they remember it when they were kids, or some stories from their grandparents. But how far are we going back? In the early 1900s, late 1880s? It seems like for sure, at least this iteration, what's happening now is at least taking us back to that Gleisberg minimum back in the turn of the century of 1899 to 1900 era, versus what we're seeing right now.
I spoke to a local farmer here, and I'm in eastern Oklahoma. And I spoke to a local farmer at the co-op, farmers co-op here, because I simply couldn't believe how much rain we were getting. And I simply said, hey, have you ever seen anything like this? And his exact words were, son, I've been farming here 52 years, and I have never seen this much rain. And it blows my mind. I put 500 pounds of seed corn down for a homestead, 500 pounds of seed corn for our livestock. We have chickens and sheep and goats and guinea hens, and we had ducks, and we have turkeys. And so I figured, hey, let's take some personal responsibility here and grow some corn, grow some sorghum, so forth and so on. I got 24 stalks that came up. I got no silk and no ears of corn, but I did get 24 stalks out of 500 pounds of seed corn. Talk about frustrating, especially when one of my core tenets is to be self-reliant, to be able to self-sustain. And I really do believe that people should start with their agriculture now. As you said, buying seeds. It's not a magic wand. You can't just go plant your seeds and automatically expect a bountiful harvest to come up out of the ground. So you should buy your seeds and learn now. Even if you're in an apartment, get a 5-gallon bucket and start planting in those, to out into the middle of nowhere, plant every available piece of land you can, simply to learn what the atmosphere is going to do, what the soil conditions are, where the sunlight is going to fall, and then you can use that to identify what species will grow and what species won't. And so we've spent the last year and a half simply playing on the landscape, planting everything we can wherever we can to learn what will grow given our current conditions, so then we can go all in on that in the coming years, because I want to be able to produce as close to 100% of our food as possible. And we're only about 40% right now, and it's a lot of work just to get 40% of your food to come up out of the ground. But that being said, it's extremely rewarding, and I would encourage everybody within the sound of my voice to do it. One of the biggest issues with preparedness is people get overwhelmed. They get a lot of anxiety because there's so much going on in the world, and they don't know where to start. Start with growing your own food. Take responsibility over that. Become your own supply chain. The better you get at decentralizing from this system that's going to crack and fall apart, the better off it's going to be for you. That's why our channel is called Bear Independent, because it's my goal to be as independent from that system as possible, so that I can provide food and security and provision and blessing to all the people that I love without being dependent upon the system.
And, I'm also thinking about, pioneering days when you didn't have the skill set of being a blacksmith or a wood carpenter or somebody who did leather work. I mean, that's where the shared skill set comes in a community, because you can't do everything. And if you come at it, okay, I can't do everything, let's focus on this little tiny bit first. And also, insect pests, you're going to have to worry about those, because if the amount of available agriculture is not growing at the level it used to, well, that means insects are hungrier than they used to be. And so are birds, and a lot of things to contend with. But if somebody has much more experience, like that person who's been farming for 53 years, I would really reach out to them. That's a skill set right within your community at arm's reach. And how many of you out there are reaching out to nurseries and other people who grow plants and the suppliers? And, where's the main trunk that comes in for the food supply in your city? Because unless it's delivered by, let's say, a Walmart truck or something that has their own vertical chain that goes directly to that store, it's coming in somewhere first. So especially off a rail line, if they're bringing in like 50,000 tons or 60,000 tons of grain on a train, it's going to stop somewhere in a depot. So, where's your seed supplier going to be coming from as well? And, one thing, corn's great, but what about some of these more ancient grains? I really think that those might be an answer to some of the things that are starting to go offline. Because if we look at the statistics right now with the hard red winter wheat, it's at 110-year lows in planting, especially where you're at. That whole swath there going down toward Texas, they're not growing hard red winter wheat anymore. You know what they're doing? They're switching to sorghum, because it seems that the hard red winter wheat, the conditions aren't there to grow it anymore. But they don't want to spook everybody, and they're just saying, oh, the prices are low, so all the farmers are switching to sorghum. I can't just believe that in a 2-year period that they're going to switch to sorghum, an ancient grain. Sorghum, millet, what are a couple other good ones? Amaranth, buckwheat. Yep. Some of these others might grow way better in these conditions where it's wetter, it's a little bit cooler. Things that amaranth that grows everywhere. It's in high Andes, it's in the high mountains, it's made for cold. So hemp, we might start looking at all these different ancient types of things that are no longer farmed except on a local homestead. What do you think about the ancient grains, or how do you think that might be for a substitute crop instead of just wheat or corn, soya?
So I think that's a great idea. And in fact, you are the one who has pointed me in that direction as far as researching that, because I'm not a farmer. And so I'm willing to take whatever information I can from wherever I can get it and chew the meat and get the bones back out and apply that to my situation. And I'm telling you point blank, corn is not growing where we are. We are having to go 7 hours from our homestead to get hard red wheat to stockpile for food storage. And so when we do that, we buy 10,000 pounds of it at a time for our community, which is a dirty word in the preparedness circles. People really don't like that word community, because I think that they are concerned about being beholden to somebody else when they really should be concerned about building meaningful relationships with other people so that they can engage in specialized labor, so that they can sleep soundly at night, so that they can have many hands to make the work light. But I'm a huge proponent of community. I really think that it matters that you surround yourself with good people and do life with them, whether that's your neighbor or your faith group or your friends from the bowling league or people from work. But having people around you, centralized around you, that you can share the burden. It's a lot of work to make food come up out of the ground. It's a lot of work to simply post security on a piece of land. So the more people you have to do that, the better. But getting back to those ancient grains, I'm all over that. And I'm going to expedite that as much as possible, because I know there's going to be a learning curve. A, I have very little experience growing grain, and B, I have no experience growing ancient grain. But the point there is to start doing it, and we intend to start doing it, because I don't want to be trying to figure out how to grow that stuff on the worst day of my life. I want as much historical data to work from and as much experience with the sweat of my brow and the blood of my hands to really understand it as I can get. And there's a danger in prepper circles of buying a whole bunch of stuff. Again, having the seeds, having the hoe and the hand tiller and the trowel and blah, 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 and having never used it and thinking that you're just going to walk into your backyard, scatter some seeds out, and a bounty will show up out of the ground. It does not work that way. It's the same thing with, owning firearms. People equate possession to proficiency. They are not the same thing. Simply owning a firearm does not mean you have trained with it and you can use it in the manner that it should be employed to be able to make an accurate shot and a timely shot, and so forth and so on. And so I would encourage those who are new to us, to Bear Independent in the way that we do things, to don't simply check the box of ownership of your seeds or your raised garden beds or your microgreen setup or your hydroponics, but actually go use them. As much as owning a rifle that's never been zeroed doesn't help you, owning a bundle of seeds that you've never planted doesn't help you. So go do the things.
Yeah, that's so true. And in all these higher tech things too, I've even seen somebody when I was at a campground, we went up to the Smoky Mountains and they were trying to use one of those fire starters, and they didn't realize that there's a coating on it that you actually have to scrape off before you can do anything to get the rod to actually spark off. And they're like, this stupid thing doesn't even work. Come on. Like, you got to scrape off the coating first before you can get the metal to strike metal. I mean, in an emergency situation where that just doesn't work, people are going to be terrified. And when they come out and they have the gizmos and everything, and they try to work it for the first time, and you got to think, going back in time and learning from our ancient past here, like gardening, there's a couple different ways. Now, Fukuoka method's a pretty interesting one, developed in Japan, where you wait for a crazy day of lightning and rain, and then you do scatter your seeds. If whatever the birds don't eat, and hopefully it gets buried in, that's one kind of method that really gets good, high results, as long as the ground's prepped first. You can't just go throw your seeds in a bunch of grass out and back. It's got to be properly done, and then you wait for the right conditions. But then another thing, gardening with the moon. I learned this from some old timers in Tennessee. We went to this Granger Tomato Festival. This is a small little town way up rural Tennessee. And there were these two old timers there. They were in their 80s, and they wrote this book called Gardening with the Moon. And, come to find out, over here talking with some farmers in Asia, oh yeah, that's old school news. We've been doing that for thousands of years. So waiting for, you're following the moon cycles to either plant or prune. So if you're going to plant your plants, wait for the dark moon, the new moon, because that's in a full growth phase or spate, if you will. And if you're going to transplant anything, wait for that different phases of the moon. Even if you need to wait an extra week before you move something, or transplant or replant or just plant, just wait that extra week to get that, natural power from the cycles of nature. And the same thing, if you're going to prune something, wait until it's at the full moon and then start pruning as the energy decreases as we come in, to the dark moon or the new moon. And you're shaking your head because I think you know exactly what I'm talking about with gardening with the moon. We need to go back to some of these more ancient traditions and start to learn what these energies are all about. And I'll talk about KP after that, but what do you think about gardening with the moon? And, what do you have for ancient knowledge that could be used in just a simple rhythm or method of the cycles of nature in itself?
Well, when you said that, what that really brought to mind is I think that a mindset shift is required to get out of a linear timeline and get back into a cyclical timeline. There's a very Western mentality, American mentality, that we're always moving forward. It's a line. Time is a line. Time marches on, man. You can't stand in the way of progress. And while in some senses I can see that and I can relate to that, time is much more cyclical. There are seasons, there are times, there are lunar cycles, everything comes in cycles, as you're seeing with these grand solar minimum cycles, the lunar cycle, as you talk about. I did a video on our channel talking about America's seasons of war. based upon a book called DuByne Numerics by Dr. Michael McGee. And it's all cyclical. The Fourth Turning. I don't know if you've read that book.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. That's really all these cycles culminating. We're at the economic cycle and the civilization cycle and what's that generational cycle all lumping on top right now when we're entering into this grand solar minimum cycle and the pole reversal cycle. Wow, it's really interesting how all these cycles are on top.
Exactly. And so if ever there was a time to do a little bit of prepping, I think it's now. And you can see historically many instances of people setting back against potential chaos as a hedge against chaos. And so there's quite a stigma around prepping and preppers. And I'm not a big proponent of the gas mask and the AR-15 and clickbait titles like 12 reasons why zombies are going to eat your dog. If you're to look at the political landscape, socioeconomic landscape in North America, I think by 2020, one half of the country is going to be upset with the other half. I think that it's entirely possible and plausible that we have an economic softening in the United States within the same time period, and we know that we're going to be experiencing some type of food scarcity. It's coming. So those three things, it doesn't take a genius or a brilliant mathematician to factor all that together and go, maybe I should be taking a little bit of my disposable income now and buying some things and training with those things to be able to put myself and my family in a better position going forward. But it's absolutely cyclical. I mean, history doesn't always repeat itself, but it often rhymes. I believe it was Mark Twain that said that. And it's coming, man. I don't need to try and argue anybody into agreeing with me. All you have to do is stop and look around. All of these different cycles are converging. And you talk about ancient wisdom. One of the things that we are a big fan of on our homestead, and one of the ways that we prepare, is by what we call keeping the old ways. And it seems very self-explanatory to a lot of people, but to others it would blow their mind. We raise our own protein. We raise our own vegetables to the best of our ability. We butcher our own animals. We preserve our own food. We have wells and creeks and stock tanks and rainwater catchment to gather water off of the land and out of the air. We can do laundry outside without electricity, and it doesn't make us weird. I mean, I'm sitting underneath fluorescent lights in an office space right now, but we willfully and willingly practice ways to separate ourselves from this system that I do believe is going to take a major hit in probably the next 12 to 18 months, so that it's not such a shock to us when the thin veneer of civility starts to crack. We're already practicing keeping the old ways. Harvesting, going out into a field and cutting hay with a scythe. We do it. It's not exactly enjoyable, but we do it. And there is kind of a simple pleasure in it, much more so than taking a John Deere baler and dragging it through a field, which I've done that too. So we have the hand tools. We do timber frame on our property. We heat with wood when we can, and we're doing our best to learn those methods now, again, so it's not a shock to us on the worst day of our life, having to figure out that you can't use the ferrocerium rod when it's still got the coating on it to get the sparks to come out, So, yeah, I'm a big fan of the ancient wisdom, the cycles of life, and keeping the old ways, because just because something is simple doesn't mean that it's stupid or it has less value than our modern technological society.
Yeah, and you spoke of wood there. And I don't know how, when I was a kid, we would go cut a tree every year and then do some of our own wood. And then we'd save it, cure it for the next year, because it was always a year in advance. So the wood we're using this year, that tree we were cutting this year, is going to be for next year. But I don't know if everybody out there realizes when you're splitting wood, that's an enormous calorie burn. And, there's the caution of doing it a certain way so you don't get anything that the axe doesn't bounce back on you. I know now today they have the hydraulic splitters and everything, but that requires petrol or electricity to get that. And I don't know, we were out in the forest, so it's very difficult to drag it. You have to bring a generator out there to be able to do anything hydraulic. So you're pretty much doing it by hand again. So again, many hands makes work. But these are some of the old things people aren't thinking about. You're going to have to, okay, you split that log and then you split it again and you got your pieces of wood. But if you're going to put it into a wood burning stove, you're going to have to get it and then cut it again and again and again to get smaller, pieces that'll fit in there. I mean, people aren't taking this into consideration, and this whole demonization of, wood burning's bad because you're putting CO2. No, it's not. Why don't you plant some trees to try to take it back up again? Put some hedgerows in there and grow some berries as a hedgerow, and then wait for these trees and look for the dead trees that fell down. So this whole demonization of us to get away from heating our homes with wood is just a scary thing in itself. San Francisco is making you rip out any wood burning types of heating devices, and there's so many in Canada. They're also making it illegal to have a wood burning stove, and then there's other states that are trying to tax you now for CO2 emissions for having a wood burning stove. But I think that's going to save our lives in the future, is right back to biomass. We're going to have to think about using biomass again to stay warm, because I certainly don't like to live in a cold, wet, damp environment when I could have a fire, wood burning stove or a fire going to heat my home. Fires are quite inefficient in fireplaces, but there's much more efficient ways to do it now with these rocket stoves. Like 2 toothpicks in there will keep your house warm for 12 hours. It's incredible, the new efficiency of these rocket stoves, and everybody's demonizing burning wood. They flipped this whole climate debate into getting you more dependent on the system. You can't collect your own rainwater in Oregon now without getting a fine. And so many states are saying you can't collect your own rainwater off your own roof because, it was going to go back into the streams, and the government was going to, city or county was going to sell that. And, you got to use the tap water again. I mean, there's so many ways becoming more self-sufficient that they try to pull you back and, get you back in the system. So, and I'm a big fan of being able to prepare ourselves here. Fourth Turning, obviously, anybody out there that hasn't read that book, you should definitely at least read the synopsis online. I mean, go put Fourth Turning in on any search engine. And one last thing about that, in the States, you are in a bubble of economic prosperity and growth at the moment. Everywhere outside of the United States is not doing so well. And then step down another level over into China, which I consider the canary in the coal mine for global growth. They're at the lowest exports since 2009. There's been runs on the banks now where they have army in the street to prevent people from getting into, let's say, a fervor because they can't get their funds. The largest state-owned enterprises are defaulting left, right, and center. And when I say bank run, I think they have the 4th bank run here this last week. And you'll find the last 30 minutes of this interview, all these different cycles are converging, what you can do, because realize when a cycle comes to a close and a new one is inaugurated, we were interrupted and interfered with the interview, which I'm going to leave in the second part so you can see exactly which subjects we were talking about when the censors came in, and we had to actually break the call and come back in and reinitiate the call. I've left everything there. Part 2 on the Adapt 2030 Patreon Grand Solar Minimum Preparedness Community.